Listen, Bishop Tobin weighs in on a social issue. Can you imagine that? And he's here to give us his thoughts.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Nice to have you aboard. Thank you very much. I kid the bishop because he has no compunction getting involved in conversations on a social and legal level. And a lot of people will say, well, why doesn't the bishop just run the church? Well, the church is not a static organization by any stretch. And, you know, it seems like it's okay for the world to be activist type, but the clergy's got to kind of stay, you know, where it's supposed to stay. Well, Bishop Tobin will be more than eloquent in explaining why he feels like he does weigh in on these matters. And I did never think that I would be talking about marijuana with the bishop, but we are tonight, as at least the first part of the conversation. So it is a pleasure to have you aboard. Let's just sneak over to the rundown camera for just a second and find out about a couple of things. I just wanted to sneak in a couple of thoughts. The Speaker of the House, Nick Mattiello, testified yesterday at the Ethics Commission. This headline, or at the Judiciary Committee on the Ethics Commission. Now, speaking about born again, if you will, the Speaker seems to be born again on the notion that the General Assembly has to get its collective act together. This all comes after Ray Gallison, the Finance Chairman, got all jammed up and left for charges that we still don't know why, right? But of course, the Speaker can't do anything easily, and the Speaker can't do anything without his ego and his power and authority wrapped all in it. This audio is a little tough. It comes off Capitol Television, but listen in, turn the volume up, and listen in to this half a minute worth of conversation that he had with the hearing folks last night.
It's unfair to the public. It's unfair to elected officials or people running for public office. And it's unfair to the Ethics Commission because they work hard and they do a good job providing oversight for the citizens of the state. And they do a good job for us, giving us advice and providing us with decisions to guide us in our decisions. So, but despite the good job that they do, partisan politics is what partisan politics is and always will be. It's not fair, it's not always right, and it's not always honest.
Look, he's talking about this 5-month blackout window. You know, it's a 2-month cycle between elections. And the 5 months from June when you sign up to say, yeah, I'm running, until Election Day, he wants to black out for any kind of ethics complaint to be filed with the Ethics Commission because of frivolous complaints that are partisan politics. It is neurotic. It is unnecessary. Frivolous claims will be turned down by the Ethics Commission toot sweet. Common Cause, the Good Government Group, says, well, we can knock it down to 60 days. That is, I think, capitulating. The idea here is if somebody levies a frivolous complaint, it'll be well known that it was a frivolous complaint. But to create a window where you're, you know, you've got amnesty from being called out on bad behavior, it's silly, and it's an overreach by the Speaker. And also this 2/3 majority on the commission necessary to change rules on the commission, all by Constitution. Again, overreach. What the Speaker should do if he's really committed to good government is just put the Ethics Commission power back by Constitution and leave it at that. Let's see if he's, you know, if he's willing to let go. It's hard for Nick Mattiello to let go. It's hard for all those people in power to let go. Who's the story? Last night, I'm not sure who was with the Megyn Kelly special. That headline reads here, well, you know, Trump says it'd be a waste of time if he doesn't win. Well, most people feel that, Donald. That's really not anything new. And he confirmed that he now likes the relationship with Megyn Kelly. And, you know, my thought on that is, well, who cares? Here's an excerpt.
This could happen again with us. I mean, it could be. Even doing this particular interview, I have great respect for you that you were able to call me and say, let's get together and let's talk. To me, I would not have done that. I don't say that as an, you know, as a positive. I think it's a negative for me. And you walk into Trump Tower, we didn't have like on a neutral site or over at Fox or something. That would be a whole different thing, and I wouldn't have done it.
I think the doormen are still recovering.
I think the whole building's recovering. And people going like, this can't be possible, right?
And this is the first you and I have ever discussed what happened between us over the past 9 months, because you and I did not talk about that in our meeting.
We didn't discuss it. No, we didn't discuss it.
Yeah, please. You know, who's the story about? Gag me. You know, Megyn Kelly is the personification of the personality anchor journalist. I don't know which. You know, look, I've got journalistic background, but let's put it this way: I don't suggest to you that I am working purely journalistically here. But even I know that if you get in the way and you become the story, even when someone had. By the way, there's been many people who have never visited the show or who haven't visited this show in a long time. Get them off the screen, will you? Cal? You like Donald Trump today? What? It's all about me, don't you understand? Who's the story? Me.
I do.
But the point here is it's not all about Megyn. And too many of the media covering this presidential race make it about them. And the other worrisome thing is that Donald Trump admits that he can't ever reconcile with anybody. I mean, if that might have been subtle, but that's profound when it comes to this presidency. He can't reconcile with anybody. And he admits it. Are you paying attention to what he says? All right. By the way, Bernie won one, lost one. Hillary won one, lost one, depending on how you look at it last night. He just won't go away. You got to admire his tenacity. All right. Let's move along to the conversation for the evening, and that is the bishop pondering pot. I didn't know how else to write it. He's thinking about it, and he's weighing in on it, and there's a headline. Actually, here's a piece of audio from the guy from Colorado, the liaison on the pot thing. He's got a formal title, I'll remember when I look at my script, but he was here, and his name is Andrew Friedman, and he visited us when he was visiting the legislature a handful of weeks ago.
I feel very comfortable with delivering the message of, this is your guys' decision of where you want to go from here, but it helps us all if we start to make better decisions on how we do it, and the more we create a coalition of thinking through the next 3 steps, I think the better off we're all going to be.
Doesn't think that this is a game we ought to be in. And he has every right to suggest that. I am completely, interestingly ambivalent about the thing. It is a wonderful thing when you come. It's nice to have you. I remind everybody that you were the first guest on Dan York's State of Mind. We've got about 20 times the audience now, so thank you. You started it.
Good. Thank you. Well, you've done very well, so I'm glad we got you off to such a good start. It's been a good program for you and for us.
It's always an honor. Why are you weighing in on marijuana?
Well, as you suggested at the beginning of the program, it's not unusual for me, and more importantly for the church, to weigh in on some of these issues that have some moral consequences to them, some moral connotations. So this is an issue that's been increasingly discussed in our state, and I think it does have some profound human consequences and moral consequences, and that's what the church does. We try to give some teaching and direction on these issues from various spiritual perspectives, and people will like them or not like them. They will agree or disagree, but I think it's the work of the church.
Well, before we get into the arguments that you're making, just to expound, this is not the first time that we've done this on TV or radio and talked about this process by which you decide. This is not something that comes from the Vatican necessarily. This is, but it's gray area for people understanding how you, as the Bishop of the Diocese of Providence, come into a place where you feel like you want to opine. So what is the thought structure that A, allows you, and B, calls you to weigh in on it?
Sure. First of all, you're right. It doesn't come from the Vatican. We have no marching orders
no pot protocol coming from
to go out and
although
talk about that.
This Pope, the Pope Francis, has certainly broadened his horizons.
And he has spoken about drug use and abuse, as has the Catechism of the Catholic Church. So you're correct. We didn't get a mandate or an encyclical from the Vatican to talk about this, but the Pope has talked about it, and the Church has spoken about it before. And it has to do with human dignity and freedom and so forth. Again, the thing that I guess caused me to talk about it now was that the issue was on the table at the General Assembly. It was garnering a certain amount of publicity and discussion, and I thought it would be appropriate to bring this one perspective that had not been brought to the discussion. I think that's the role of the church and the role of the religious community in general.
Okay, so you know what? We'll hear about that perspective when we come back. But first, I just want to remind you that the folks at Cumberland Kitchen and Bath Design Center are there for you, not only for your kitchen. I've bragged enough about the work that they did on our kitchen. It was a tough decision, because these are not cheap expenses. These are worthy investments you make in your home. And I will tell you that we have returned the investment both by quality of life already, and I know value on the home is certainly going to come. But that can happen with the bathroom too. You know, when people are shopping for homes, if you're ever thinking about transacting your home, there are two places that they look: kitchens and baths. And so not only the kitchen, but the bath can be designed right to your quality of life, lifestyle, and functional needs. Just have a designer come to your home and talk about your dreams, both with your kitchen and with your bath, and know that everything will be done on time and on budget. Back with Bishop Tobin in just a couple of minutes. Don't go anywhere.
What I see, I've been a practicing criminal defense lawyer for 30 years. What I've seen is the war on drugs, and in particular the war on marijuana, having a devastating impact on low-income communities, and most particularly communities of color. Our enforcement of the marijuana laws, all of our drug laws, is extraordinarily discriminatory.
Andy Horowitz, who is a law professor at Roger Williams University, a month or so ago talking about this. You know, the church is very concerned about social justice. The church is very concerned about folks who are low income. So his arguments are in that direction, but you come out and say, hey, listen, this legalization is a bad idea. Respond to that after you tell me exactly why you decided to weigh in and say no on this.
I decided to weigh in again because I think we have a significant drug use problem in the state, drug use and abuse. And my perspective was, what do we have to gain from making this illegal? Now, you know, I'm certainly not opposed to the use of marijuana for medical purposes. I think that's legitimate. I'm not even opposed to the decriminalization of marijuana. I think that speaks to the law enforcement and the incarceration and so forth that some people have expressed their concerns about. But to make it legal, to say that there's nothing in our societal norms that prevents people from using this, I just don't know what that adds to the equation. And I think it has the potential of doing more harm than good. Do we really need that? What's the point of it? What's the purpose of it? And especially now when we have such a huge problem with opioid abuse and the drug use that seeps into the community, especially the minority community in some places. Do we take away the last societal barrier that says this is not a good thing to do? It's something we should not be encouraging. I think that's a significant issue.
Do you think the marijuana thing is a last barrier? Because you know, one of the things that I'm concerned about is some kind of slippery slope. I'm just interested in your arguments and those four. I can't believe how ambivalent I am on the issue. I mean, interested ambivalence, that's a paradox. It doesn't make any sense. It's an oxymoron in a lot of ways. But I don't know how to treat the issue anymore because I see arguments on both sides. I have no personal interest in it, so but so many people think it's a human rights issue to be able to. There's the social justice issue, and then there's the worry that some have that, you know, if this now, then what else down the line? Are you concerned about that?
I am concerned about that, and as I said in my article that was published and started all this conversation, there are a lot of people. An argument can be made that the individual use of marijuana by responsible individual in controlled circumstances is not intrinsically morally evil. It's not necessarily evil all the time. We would approach it as we approach the use of alcohol, for example, or gambling. So the effect itself is the use of marijuana itself might not be always sinful. It might not always be morally wrong, but we have to weigh the consequences. And just, again, from my very amateur point of view, my novice point of view, I read about the impaired driving that's happened in some places. I've read about the medical problems that have been studied. That whole question about whether or not it is a gateway drug, I think that's a legitimate question. I don't know what the answer is. But all the consequences that come with this, I don't think we have a handle on that yet. And I don't think it's something we need to add to our society right now. Gosh, we have so many problems in the state, societal problems, dysfunction. Do we want even to take a chance of adding one more? And the other question is, why do people use drugs? What are they looking for? Is it some kind of fulfillment? Is it some kind of peacefulness? Is it some kind of escape? what's the purpose of using drugs, especially if it impairs judgment and function and reasoning?
Yes,
the
I can
purpose?
feel the response on the couch as people are watching this, answering back to you. Well, what's the purpose of having a few beers? What's the purpose? The church has never, and culturally, the Catholic Church has never ever made alcohol a problem.
That's right.
Ever. There's plenty of Catholic culture that has beer and booze.
Well, we use
engaged.
alcohol for our sacramental life, don't we?
Correct,
And
right.
even in the Bible, St. Paul says, you should take a little bit of wine. It's good for your stomach. So
Right.
it seems to me
And
that
Jesus
eating
turned the water into wine.
Eating and drinking in an appropriate way it's a more natural function than smoking a drug or the other forms of marijuana that can be used. And that's
And
one
they
of the
say, well,
problems
Bishop,
too.
it's not your thing, but it's our thing, da-da-da. And the conversation just goes round and
Exactly.
round. When you admit a novice expertise, you're actualized about your expertise. And so if you feel a novice level of expertise, why use your capital and weigh in?
I think I use capital because it does have some questions related to human dignity and human freedom. In the end, it's a respect life issue. What are we doing to our individual lives from a medical, moral point of view? What are we doing to our societal life and our culture? Is this a good thing for us to do? Is this a good thing to legalize and say we have very few limitations on this? What do we have to gain with that? And I've had enough correspondence from people, and I've read enough stories, and I've looked at some of the studies of medical and health concerns and the driving concerns and the impairment, to know that there are at least problems around this. There are at least questions. And if I have to weigh into it, I would say, at least for now, let's not legalize it, and let's see where this goes.
Yeah, it's interesting. You raise some really great questions. I mean, why do we need to sedate ourselves with various options? I mean, there's a bigger question about happiness and coping and the stresses in life and all that kind of stuff.
Why do we need to sedate ourselves? And what are we missing otherwise? I
Maybe
guess from
maybe
my
prayer.
perspective, people
Maybe
I would
prayer.
say, yeah, we need to pray a little bit. If people were going to their churches and synagogues and temples, maybe they would find some fulfillment that's even better than pot.
When we come back, who you find in the church, generally male, but the Pope's open-minded. Talk to the bishop about it when we come back. Pope Francis has been breaking ground and chipping away at new ground, and here's another reflection.
Pope Francis is taking a step towards strengthening the role of women in the Catholic Church. On Thursday, he said the Vatican should study the possibility of women serving as deacons.
Until women are able to make decisions at the same levels of men as priests and bishops, then we live in an unequal situation.
Right now, only men can be deacons, which are similar to priests. Deacons can lead prayer services and offer the sacrament, but they can't celebrate Mass. The Pope's groundbreaking remarks signal he's open to letting women serve in ordained ministry, but experts say it's unlikely the Church will let women be priests.
The Pope has already said that he doesn't want to clericalize women. He wants to advance women in society. And clericalization is a role of service, but he wants to advance women, not make them clerics.
Still, supporters of the Holy Father say he's done more than his predecessors to integrate women into the life of the Church.
I don't think it is that important to divide women from men. We are all human beings. He is promoting and enhancing people, and therefore also the role of women.
So, Bishop, the cleric aspect of this seems to be the linchpin, correct?
Right, because we've always recognized the diaconate as part of holy orders, one of the 7 sacraments of the Church. When we speak about holy orders, we refer to deacons, priests, and bishops. So when we talk about admitting women to the diaconate, then that raises the question about their admission to holy orders.
And the short history, 4 minutes to solve this only small issue, right? But the short history on why men are preached exclusively is?
Because, well, a couple of reasons. Again, 4 minutes is tough. Right. First of all, I guess we go back to the example of Jesus. When he chose his apostles, he chose men. And throughout the history of the Catholic Church, at least, there have never been women serving in holy orders, certainly as priests and bishops. There's some evidence in the early church that there were women who were called deacons and deaconesses, I suppose, but their role was very limited and very different than we recognize as deacons today. And there was no evidence they were ever admitted to holy orders. So,
is there a theological study that gives you an inkling as to why Jesus only chose men?
Well, I think there are lots and lots of theological studies. One of the things that the Pope referred to, I think he's probably hinting at, is 13 or 14 years ago, there was another Vatican Commission that studied the same question about women being admitted to the diaconate. And the Pope is saying, now, well, maybe we should take another look at this. But one of the things we've had to learn about this Pope is how to interpret him. You know, in the past, popes typically spoke in very structured ways with pastoral letters or homilies or decrees. This Pope is taken to very informal, off the cuff, impromptu conversations, and so often someone has to go back and say, this is what the Pope said, or this is what he meant, or this is what he didn't mean. We've seen that a number of times now, and that's exactly what happened with this. There was a lot of speculation about the Pope ordaining women deacons, but the spokesman came out the next day and said, no, that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about studying it so we understand it better. That's the key to interpreting this Pope, I think. He has a lot of informal conversations which are fun to listen to and speculate about, but in the end, he's really not changing very much.
You smile when you talk about this. Why are you smiling?
Because it's been a challenge for all of us. We love Pope Francis, and we all admire what he's doing for the church and the world, but it's a new style for us that I think is opening up a lot of conversations. You know,
well, in the same sense that you have changed the diocese with weighing in on issues, albeit I think more formal, but you've broadened the church's scope of in voice on opinion.
I think the Pope and I have that in common. We say
Yes.
lots of crazy things that get people excited. So maybe that's the only thing the Pope and I have in common. He's a much better and holier man than I'll ever be. But yeah, his style tends to be pretty informal, and at least on occasion, and that's different for us.
Is it fair? My Catholicism gets in the way of asking this question properly, but is Pope driving you nuts a little bit?
Well, I don't know if he's driving me nuts, but he does give us a lot of work to do to understand things and to explain them and try to put out some of the fires. When the Pope says, who am I to judge? Or the Pope says that Donald Trump's not a Christian for building a wall, or when he says that you don't have to breed like rabbits, or when he said, we can have women deacons, or there's a whole list. How do we deal with that, and how do we interpret it and explain it to people?
Most Catholics and non-Catholics alike would love to be a fly on the wall when the bishops get together, have dinner, and try to work this whole thing out. Well, I think we'll cut our losses and just say, stick to the pot debate right now. When you're in better shape with that one.
In itself raises questions, huh?
It is always an honor and pleasure to have you aboard. Thanks very much.
Dan, appreciate it.
Bishop
Always
Tobin.
a good conversation.
When we come back, final words. Stay with us. By the way, coming up on the Friday show, we'll have more clergy speaking about drug policy, so the bishop's not the only one weighing in. By the way, did you see this on Canal Street in the city? They're having a post-it war. Somebody first started with hi, and then on the other side, what did they do? I don't know what they're writing back and forth, but across the street, how cheesy is that? How about a big fat no on the other side of the street? So they're having a good time. People have a lot of time on their hands. Thought it was a tough economy. Anyway, Senator will ask on a special piece of legislation tomorrow as well. I'll see you on the radio at 3. Bye-bye.